The next time you walk through the automatic sliding doors of your local grocery store, I want you to look closely at the shelves, not at what is missing, but at what is there. It looks normal. It looks peaceful. Row after row of brightly colored packages, fully stocked, priced exactly where you expect them to be. But what you are looking at is not a stable supply chain. It is a mathematical illusion. It is a lagging indicator of a system that has already broken down behind the scenes. Right now, some of the absolute cheapest, most overlooked staples in your pantry are sitting on top of a systemic fault line. I am not talking about the items that have already made screaming headlines, the fresh meat, the seasonal produce, or the dairy that spiked and forced everyone to adjust their weekly budgets. I am talking about the quiet anchors of the grocery store. The dry goods, the canned items, the basic ingredients that you buy on autopilot and store in the back of your cabinets for months without a second thought. The stuff that still looks completely fine on the shelf today, but is quietly riding a wave of supply failures, geopolitical shifts, and agricultural collapses that have not yet hit the retail price tag, but they are coming. The economic physics of this are already in motion. The commodity data, the import receipts, and the murmurs from deep inside the food distribution networks point to a single unavoidable conclusion. We are weeks away from sudden jarring price hikes of 30, 40, or even 60% on foods we consider completely bulletproof. For the last 2 years, I have been obsessively tracking these numbers. I have been looking at wholesale commodity futures, analyzing maritime shipping bottlenecks, and talking directly to people who actually run the processing plants and regional logistics networks. The picture they paint is not one of temporary inflation that will wash over in a few months. It is a structural realignment of what food actually costs to produce, package, and transport. And the most dangerous part of this situation is how invisible it remains to the average shopper. This brings us to a massive, hidden paradox of modern grocery retail: the contract lag. When you buy a can of tomatoes or a box of pasta today, you are not paying for today's agricultural reality. You are paying a price locked in by corporate contracts signed 12, 18, or even 24 months ago. Supermarket giants buy in massive, forward-looking volumes to keep their shelves consistent and their prices stable. But those old contracts are expiring right now. The new contracts, the ones reflecting the true brutal cost of energy, restricted water rights, depleted soils, and erratic weather over the last 2 years, are being signed today. When those newly contracted goods hit the shelves, the price tag will adjust not in small, gentle 10-cent increments, but in giant, sudden leaps. Most people have absolutely no idea this is coming. They are living in a false sense of security, assuming that because a bag of rice or a jar of peanut butter has only crept up slightly, the worst of the economic storm has passed. It has not. The fuse has been lit, and the spark is traveling fast toward the retail shelf. Over the next 20 minutes, we are going to count down 15 specific everyday foods that are about to undergo this violent repricing. We are going to look at the hard data, the physical constraints, and the geographical traps that make these increases inevitable. But pay incredibly close attention when we reach number 4 on our list. Number 4 is an ingredient so simple, so completely woven into the fabric of everyday life that you probably do not even think of it as a volatile commodity. There are no panic-inducing news cycles about it. There are no viral social media videos showing empty shelves or outraged shoppers. Yet, the moment I finally connected the dots on this one specific item, when I saw how global energy demands, international export bans, and domestic import quotas are converging to choke its supply, I stopped typing. I closed my laptop, walked out of my office, and drove straight to the store to buy 50 pounds of it. When we get to number 4, you will understand exactly why you need to do the same thing today. Before the rest of the market wakes up to what is happening, this is not a drill, and it is not about hoarding out of panic. It is about simple, cold mathematics. It is about recognizing that the era of dirt cheap, thoughtless food is ending, and the people who understand the math right now are the only ones who will protect their household budgets before the dam breaks. Let us look at the numbers. To understand why your grocery store is sitting on a subterranean economic fault line, we have to dismantle the myth of modern agricultural abundance. We have been conditioned to believe that the global food system is a miracle of endless variety and effortless transport. It is not. It is a highly optimized, dangerously brittle logistics network built on a single, fatal design philosophy: just-in-time delivery. For decades, multinational food conglomerates and supermarket giants have chased one objective: driving down the cost of carrying inventory. They eliminated warehouses. They sold off local storage facilities. They replaced physical food reserves with digital tracking systems, trusting that container ships, freight trains, and heavy diesel trucks would move grain, oil, and canned goods across continents exactly when they were needed. This hyper-efficiency works spectacularly well during decades of cheap fuel, predictable weather, and stable geopolitics. But it stripped all structural buffers out of the system. Today, there is no backup plan. If a single primary growing region fails, or if a critical shipping channel bottlenecks, there are no deep regional grain elevators or localized warehouses to absorb the shock. The disruption translates instantly to the wholesale market, and eventually to the retail shelf. This operational vulnerability is compounded by a profound geographic trap. The modern food system does not draw its staples from a diverse, global patchwork of small, resilient farms. Instead, it relies on a hyper-concentrated handful of specialized agricultural hubs, monoculture engine rooms that feed the entire planet. Let us look at the hard geography of pasta. Over 80% of Canada's durum wheat, the specialized, high-protein grain required to manufacture dried pasta, is seeded in a single semi-arid stretch of the Saskatchewan prairies. If you want to make pasta in Rome, Chicago, or Tokyo, your food supply chain likely runs through this specific, vulnerable corner of North America. Between 2021 and 2024, back-to-back drought cycles severely depleted soil moisture across these prairies. While Canadian production saw a temporary yield rebound of 12% in 2025, reaching 7.1 million tons, the underlying structural problems were far from resolved. Carry-in stocks remained at historic lows, leaving no safety margin. By early 2026, the reality of stagnating durum prices compared to more lucrative red spring wheat forced a massive structural shift. Private commodity analysts at Left Field Commodity Research revealed that Canadian farmers abandoned durum, slashing seeded acreage far below government expectations to produce a projected 5.4 million tons. Simultaneously, Mexico's largest wheat-producing state, Sonora, saw its durum output collapse by 48%, below its 5-year average due to severe water shortages. This is the geographic trap in action. When the primary global engine rooms falter simultaneously, the international market enters a bidding war, and the corporate contracts signed by retail chains are forced to reprice at the absolute top of the market. Canada.ca. Issue 3. Now, examine the structural policy decisions that are actively redirecting food crops into industrial fuel pipelines. This is not an accident of nature. It is a deliberate legislative choice. For decades, Brazil has sat at the center of the global sugar trade, serving as the world's largest exporter of sugarcane. However, the fate of your baking cabinet is directly tied to Brazil's domestic energy policy. Dating back to the Pro-Cool program of the 1970s and culminating in the Fuel of the Future program, the Brazilian government has systematically built an infrastructure designed to substitute gasoline with sugarcane-based ethanol. When global oil prices surge, or when government mandates dictate higher biofuel mixtures, Brazilian mills make a cold mathematical calculation. They divert their sugarcane harvest away from food-grade sugar production and directly into ethanol distillation. Industry Association's Unica confirmed that for the 2026-27 harvest season, Brazil's ethanol production is projected to reach an unprecedented 21-year record of 36.9 billion litres. This massive surge in biofuel output is actively cannibalizing raw sugar exports. While sugar crops thrive under favorable weather, the physical volume of sucrose leaving Brazilian ports for the global food market is structurally restricted by domestic fuel mandates. This policy forces international food processors to scramble for alternative, high-cost supply sources. USDA Foreign Agricultural Service Issue 2. At the exact same time, the global rice market, the primary caloric foundation for billions of people, is at the mercy of domestic political calculations in New Delhi. India is the undisputed giant of the rice trade, controlling roughly 40% of all global exports, a volume larger than the exports of Thailand, Vietnam, and Pakistan combined. In 2023 and 2024, facing domestic crop anxieties and soaring food inflation ahead of critical national elections, the Indian government enacted severe export restrictions, including a blanket ban on non-basmati white rice. The global impact was immediate. International prices surged to 15-year highs, forcing import-dependent nations across Africa and Asia into fiscal crises. Although the Indian Union government relaxed these export curbs in 2025, following a record domestic harvest of 137.8 million tons, the policy landscape remains highly volatile. In September 2025, India's Directorate General of Foreign Trade quietly implemented a strict new regulatory layer, requiring all non-basmati rice exports to be registered with the Agricultural and Processed Food Products Export Development Authority, APDA. This was not a routine bureaucratic adjustment. It was a strategic mechanism designed to track, regulate, and if necessary, instantly freeze outward shipments to protect domestic food reserves from sudden crop failures in agricultural hubs like Punjab and Bengal. The message to global grain buyers is clear. The flow of Indian rice is no longer a reliable open market commodity. It is an instrument of state policy, subject to being shut down at a moment's notice. Vajiramisho 3. The compounding weight of these historical and geographic pressures has eliminated any remaining elasticity in the global food supply. When you factor in the systemic collapse of Mediterranean olive harvests, where 3 consecutive years of catastrophic drought across Andalusia, Spain, and southern Italy completely exhausted regional olive oil reserves, the picture becomes undeniable. We are not dealing with a temporary inflationary spike driven by labor shortages or short-term transport bottlenecks. We are witnessing the structural collision of a hyper-optimized, zero-buffer global supply chain with the hard physical limits of a shifting climate and nationalistic resource hoarding. The food sitting on store shelves today is priced on a reality that no longer exists. The historical buffer stocks have been spent, the cheap corporate contracts are expiring, and the geographic traps are snapping shut. To understand the true scale of the crisis, we have to look past the official press releases and examine the raw, uncomfortable clash between corporate boardrooms, government regulators, and the farmers who are actually getting crushed by the volatility. What is happening right now is not a simple supply and demand correction. It is a war of attrition where corporate giants are using the cover of systemic crises to structurally reset the baseline prices you pay at the register, while leaving the primary producers with less than ever before. Let us start with the complete collapse and engineered resurrection of the egg market. Throughout 2024 and 2025, the official narrative blamed a single culprit: highly pathogenic avian influenza. We were told that the culling of over 70 million birds made record-high retail prices of over $8 a dozen completely unavoidable. But behind the scenes, a far more cynical mechanism was operating. In March 2025, the United States Department of Justice issued a bombshell civil investigative demand to Cal-Maine Foods, the nation's largest egg producer, in connection with a federal antitrust investigation into nationwide price fixing. The allegations were stark. While independent farmers were devastated by flock losses, industry giants were accused of using the avian flu panic as a smokescreen to coordinate premium pricing and artificially inflate wholesale benchmarks. The numbers speak for themselves. Cal-Maine's fiscal net income skyrocketed to $1.2 billion, a massive leap from the previous year's $277 million. Financial Times showed too by early 2026, wholesale egg prices collapsed dramatically, hitting historic lows as mass restocking flooded the market. But do not let that fool you. This extreme, artificial volatility is itself a structural weapon. While industrial-scale producers survived the crash, independent, family-owned egg farms were forced to sell their products at 35 cents a dozen, well below their 79-cent production cost. This has triggered a wave of small farm bankruptcies across the Midwest, leaving the egg market more consolidated, more corporate-dominated, and more vulnerable to the next inevitable outbreak than at any point in history. The corporate infrastructure has been set up to instantly trigger massive vertical price spikes. The moment the next spring migration brings the virus back to commercial laying operations. Farm progress. This disconnect between commodity markets and retail reality is even more grotesque in the global chocolate trade. Throughout 2024 and early 2025, cocoa futures experienced an unprecedented vertical ascent, peaking at an astronomical $12,000 per metric ton. The mainstream media blamed aging West African trees and climate volatility. But look at what happened in early 2026. Cocoa futures plunged by over 65%, stabilizing in the low $4,000 range. Yet if you walk into a grocery store today, chocolate bars, cocoa powder, and baking chips are more expensive than they have ever been. IFTs show 3 why. Because of the contract lag and a calculated strategy known as demand destruction, major chocolate manufacturers are currently processing raw cocoa they purchased months ago at peak prices, and they are passing every cent of that historic cost directly to you. To protect their quarterly profit margins, corporate giants like Hershey and Mondelez did not just raise prices, they permanently changed the physical composition of their products. They engaged in rapid recipe reformulation, substituting high-cost cocoa butter with cheaper palm oil and hydrogenated fats. They shrunk package sizes while keeping the prices elevated. Meanwhile, at the starting point of the supply chain in Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana, the actual farmers did not see a single cent of the record-high market windfall because their farm gate prices were fixed by state regulators long before the market spiked. Big Chocolate has successfully lowered the cost of its raw inputs while locking in permanently higher, shrinkflated retail prices. Materia Renovabilia show 3 now. Zoom in on the quiet crisis unfolding in the Central Valley of California, the agricultural heartland that produces nearly 90% of America's canned and processed tomatoes. This is a region defined by a brutal, zero-sum water war. Under federal environmental mandates, massive volumes of fresh water are diverted away from agricultural irrigation systems to protect endangered fish species in the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. This policy has created a structural water deficit that has turned water into a highly speculative, financialized commodity. For a mid-size farmer in the Central Valley, the cost of pumping groundwater or purchasing supplemental water allocations has surged past sustainable limits, squeezed by rising electricity costs, elevated diesel prices, and expensive water. Independent tomato growers are facing a grim economic calculation. Processing tomatoes are a low-margin crop that requires intensive irrigation. Private equity firms and corporate agricultural conglomerates have stepped into this vacuum, buying up bankrupt family farms and systematically retired their tomato acreage. They are replacing these vital, affordable food crops with high-yield, drought-resistant nut trees like almonds and pistachios, which yield far higher profit margins per acre-foot of water. The physical pipeline feeding the American canned tomato industry is actively shrinking. The remaining processing facilities are running at reduced capacities, raising their processing fees to cover their overhead. This is a quiet structural dead end. The supply of domestic canned tomatoes is being choked out not by a sudden natural disaster, but by the financialization of water and the systematic extraction of affordable crops from the American landscape. When you look at these cases together, the pattern becomes blindingly clear. The food price hikes heading your way are not random. They are the direct result of an industrial food system where corporate consolidation has eliminated competition, where government regulations are actively prioritizing biofuels and conservation over affordable food production, and where the physical limit of global transport networks are being reached. We have built a system that is incredibly profitable for a small handful of global distributors, but completely hostile to the farmers who grow the food and the consumers who buy it. The cheap corporate contracts that kept your grocery store insulated from these structural failures are running out, and there are no safety nets left to catch us.